The late afternoon sun tinged the imperial palms, lining the entrance to the imposing Arlington mansion with gold. In the Kensington Gardens district of London, this century-old property was known as Magnolia Manor, a reference to the majestic trees that surrounded its gardens and whose flowers perfumed the air in spring. Behind its high walls and wrought-iron gate, the mansion held stories of many generations of one of the most traditional families in London's high society. Mrs. Jemima Smith crossed the main garden with silent steps and an upright posture, as she had done for 23 years. At 52, her face bore the marks of time and labor, but she maintained an alert gaze that seemed to capture every detail around her. Her navy blue uniform with white details was impeccably pressed, as was the apron protecting her dress. Her black hair, already streaked with grey, was always pulled back in a firm bun, giving her an appearance of serene dignity. That night, Magnolia Manor was transformed. Crystal chandeliers reflected light in thousands of fragments, Persian tapestries adorned the marble floor, arrangements of rare orchids decorated every table and strategic corner. The air was impregnated with the aroma of expensive perfumes and premium champagne. London's high society attended in full force to celebrate the new marriage of Dr. Augustus Arlington, widowed only a month prior. "Jemima, please check if the canapes are being served on the west veranda. Mrs. Isadora likes everything perfect," said Sophia, the governess, as she hurried past, carrying a tray of glasses. Jemima nodded and headed to the veranda. Her eyes, however, fixed for a moment on the elegant figure descending the main staircase, Isadora Montgomery Arlington, the master's new wife. A 35-year-old woman, whose beauty was sculpted in expensive gyms and exclusive aesthetic clinics. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her bare shoulders, and her red haute couture dress embraced every curve of her body with millimeter precision. Isadora smiled at the guests who greeted her, but Jemima, who had learned to read people over decades of service, noticed the calculated coldness behind that smile. The new lady of the manor's eyes, an almost translucent green, did not express the same joy as her lips. It was like watching a talented actress on stage. "She will never replace Mrs. Caroline," a voice whispered close to Jemima. It was Silas, the gardener, who had served the family for almost 3 decades, an elderly man with dark skin and calloused hands who knew every corner of those gardens. "The mourning period has barely ended, and the doctor has already brought another woman into the house," he continued in a low tone. "Mrs. Caroline deserved more respect," Jemima sighed, remembering the former mistress. Caroline Arlington had been a gentle woman, a talented pianist who always treated the staff with dignity and kindness. Her sudden passing, after a sudden illness as officially stated, left a void in the manor. Especially for little Matthew, the couple's only child, a 10-year-old boy with lively eyes and an easy smile who adored his mother. Dr. Augustus Arlington, a renowned 50-year-old neurosurgeon, known for his skill in the operating room and his austere temperament outside of it, surprised everyone by announcing his new marriage so quickly. Isadora Montgomery, a socialite he had met at a medical conference, had won over the widower with a speed that fueled gossip for weeks in London's social circles. "Where's young Matthew?" Silas asked, looking around. At a party like this, he'd usually be running around or hiding under the tables. The question made Jemima frown. It had been 5 days since she last saw little Matthew. According to Isadora, the boy was spending some time at her aunt's country house in Surrey Hills to help him process the recent changes in the family, an explanation that sounded reasonable to everyone, except for Jemima. She had known Matthew since birth, had helped raise him. The boy never left without saying goodbye to her, without giving her one of his tight hugs that made her heart melt. "He'll be back next week," Jemima replied, repeating what she had been told, although a persistent unease gnawed at her chest. The party continued its natural course. Dr. Augustus, always formal in his impeccable suit, circulated among the guests with a contained smile, receiving congratulations on his new marriage. Some looks of disapproval were disguised behind champagne flutes, but most seemed to have accepted the situation with the typical complacency of those who did not want to displease one of the most influential figures in London medicine. Jemima observed everything as she served and collected glasses. becoming almost invisible as good domestic staff learn to be. It was during one of these moments that she noticed something strange. Isadora. As she passed through the corridor leading to the east wing of the mansion, an area rarely used since it had been renovated, looked cautiously in all directions and, believing herself to be alone, pulled a golden key from her décolletage. With quick movements, she unlocked a door and entered, closing it silently behind her. That door led to a set of guest rooms that, as far as Jurema knew, had been empty for months. Even more intriguing was the fact that, the day before, when trying to clean that area, Jurema found all the doors locked, something unusual in the house's routine. "Jurema, the guests in the library are asking for more canapes." Sophia's voice interrupted her thoughts, and Jurema moved away, casting a last look at the door that had just closed. Later that night, when most of the guests had already left, and only the most intimate remained talking in the main living room, Jurema took the opportunity to collect the glasses left in the garden. The night was clear, with a full moon bathing the manor in an almost ethereal silvery light. It was then that she heard it. A muffled sound like a small whimper, coming from one of the second-floor windows in the east wing. Jurema stopped motionless, trying to catch that sound again. It could have been just the wind in the magnolia leaves, but something in her instinct told her it wasn't. That sound had a human, distressed quality. It reminded her of the sounds Matthew made when he was younger and had nightmares, a restrained, frightened cry. The window from which the sound seemed to come was darkened, with the curtains closed. It was one of the rooms that should have been empty. A shiver ran down Jurema's spine when, for a brief instant, she saw a movement in the curtain, as if someone had pulled it back slightly to look out. Only to let it fall quickly afterwards, Jurema felt her heart accelerate. A suspicion began to form in her mind, an idea so disturbing that she almost dismissed it immediately. But the pieces were starting to fit together. Matthew's sudden disappearance, the locked doors, the key Isadora kept so carefully, that distressed sound in the night. "What are you doing out here alone, Jurema?" Isadora's voice cut through the silence like a razor. Jurema turned, finding the new lady of the manor standing a few feet away, a polite smile on her lips that didn't reach her cold eyes, just collecting the last glasses. "Madam," Jurema replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The party was a success. It was, wasn't it?" Isadora approached, her red dress looking even more intense under the moonlight. "Everyone loved our new decor. Everything new, everything different. That's how it should be, don't you think? Leaving the past behind." There was something menacing in the way she pronounced those words, staring intently at Jurema as if she could read her thoughts. "Certainly, madam," Jurema replied, holding the tray with glasses against her chest like a shield. "Excellent," Isadora smiled more broadly, "because I wouldn't tolerate anyone living in nostalgia in this house, or worse, meddling where they shouldn't." With an elegant nod, Isadora turned and walked back into the mansion, leaving Jurema alone with her growing certainty that something was very wrong at Magnolia Manor. And that, somehow, little Matthew was at the center of this mystery. The morning after the party brought a sky laden with grey clouds and a fine rain that blurred the stained-glass windows of Magnolia Manor. Jurema woke earlier than usual, restless after a night of disturbing dreams in which she repeatedly heard the muffled cry of a child. She put on her uniform with her usual precision and headed to the kitchen for the staff's breakfast. "What's with that face, Jurema?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," commented Mrs. Josephine, the skilled cook who had fed the Arlington family for almost 15 years. "I didn't sleep well," Jurema replied, accepting the cup of strong coffee Josephine offered her. "This house has been strange since the changes." Josephine made a discreet gesture with her head, indicating that she perfectly understood the subtext. Isadora's arrival had altered the dynamics of the manor in ways that went beyond mere furniture replacement or meal schedule reorganization. There was now a constant atmosphere of tension, as if the air had become heavier, harder to breathe. "Young Matthew called last night," Josephine commented casually, as she prepared the cheese buns that would be served for breakfast. "He spoke to the doctor for about 5 minutes. I was on the extension in the library when the call came in." Jurema looked up, interested. "And how was he?" "Did he say when he's coming back?" Josephine hesitated, kneading the dough harder than necessary. It was strange. It seemed rehearsed, like he was reading a script. He said he was having a lot of fun, that Mrs. Isadora's aunt has horses and he's learning to ride. But his voice, I can't explain it. What about his voice? Jurema leaned forward, the cup forgotten in her hands. It sounded like he was scared, or like someone was next to him, you know. Guiding what to say. Josephine lowered her voice even further. And there was a moment when the connection got bad with interference. At that point, I swear I heard him start to say, "Help me," but it was cut off. Then the line returned to normal, and he said goodbye as if nothing had happened. Jurema felt a chill run down her spine. Her suspicions, already strong, were gaining increasing consistency. Who answered the phone when he called? Mrs. Isadora. She spoke with him first, said she was checking if he was well, and only then passed him to the doctor. But she stayed right there the whole time. The sound of heels in the corridor interrupted the conversation. In seconds, Isadora's elegant figure appeared at the kitchen door. Wearing a teal silk ensemble that highlighted her light eyes, she looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, even at that hour of the morning. "Good morning," she said with a studied smile. "I need breakfast served earlier today. Augustus has an important surgery and needs to leave in 40 minutes. Yes, Madame, Josephine replied, moving quickly to attend to the request. Isadora's eyes fell on Jurema, who remained seated with her cup of coffee. Jurema, isn't it? Augustus spoke very highly of your work. Thank you, madam. He mentioned that you've been with the family since Matthew was born. Jurema nodded. Yes, madam. I saw the boy take his first steps. Something indefinable passed through Isadora's eyes. A quick flash, like a reptile moving beneath the surface of a lake. Your dedication is admirable, Isadora commented, still smiling. I imagine you must miss him very much these days. Yes, madam. When does he return from Surrey Hills? The question, deliberately direct, made Isadora's smile waver for a fraction of a second. Oh, we don't know yet. He's adapting so well there. My Aunt Eleanor has a wonderful country estate, you know? Fresh air, animals, nature, a true paradise for a city child. She adjusted a diamond bracelet on her wrist. Besides, we thought it would be good for him to be away from painful memories for a while. Jurema noticed a subtle inconsistency. The night before, during the party, she had heard Isadora comment to a guest that her only living aunt had lived in France for years. But she kept her expression neutral, merely nodding. I understand, madam. Indeed, the boy suffered a lot with his mother's passing. Exactly. Isadora smoothed the impeccable fabric of her outfit. Well, I have to check the arrangements for lunch today. Oh, Jurema, please. The East Wing doesn't need to be cleaned for now. We're making some changes to the decor, and it's all quite messy. With a graceful nod, Isadora left the kitchen, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and more questions than answers. Throughout the day, Jurema discreetly observed the movements of the house. She noticed how Isadora made a point of being present whenever Dr. Augustus spoke on the phone. She also noticed the frequency with which the new mistress visited the East Wing, always checking if she was being watched before using the golden key that Jurema now knew she kept in a small pocket, sewn inside her clothes. In the late afternoon, while cleaning Dr. Augustus's study, an elegant room with dark wood-paneled walls and shelves filled with medical books, Jurema noticed something in the wastebasket, a torn piece of paper. Normally she wouldn't have paid attention, but a detail caught her eye. It was part of a drawing made with crayon, and she immediately recognized Matthew's style. The boy loved to draw and had a characteristic style, with people having large heads and exaggerated smiles. Discreetly, Jurema retrieved the fragment. It was just a corner of what appeared to have been a larger drawing, showing what looked like Magnolia Manor, with a specific window marked in red, a window in the East Wing. On the back, in a child's uneven handwriting, was written, "Help." Jurema's heart pounded. That piece of paper confirmed her suspicions. Matthew was not in Surrey Hills. He was here in that house, possibly locked in a room in the East Wing. But why? What reason would Isadora have for doing something so cruel to a child? And how could Dr. Augustus, an intelligent and observant man, not notice what was happening right under his nose? Jurema put the drawing fragment in her apron pocket. She needed more proof. She needed to better understand what was happening before confronting the situation. If she was wrong, she risked losing the job that was her only source of income. If she was right, well, she was dealing with a woman capable of imprisoning a child. What else would she be capable of? That night after dinner, Jurema was collecting the silverware when she heard an argument coming from the study. Isadora and Dr. Augustus's voices, normally contained and polite, were raised. It makes no sense for him to stay there so long. He's my son, for goodness sake. Dr. Augustus's voice sounded frustrated. Augustus, we've talked about this. Matthew needs this time away to process everything that's happened. You saw how he was after the funeral. Barely speaking, barely eating. The psychologist agreed that a change of environment would be beneficial. Isadora's voice had taken on a persuasive, almost hypnotic tone. But it's been almost 2 weeks. I want to see my son. You spoke to him yesterday on the phone. He's fine, he's happy. Do you want to snatch him away now and bring him back to this house full of painful memories? Do you want to undo all the progress he's made? There was a long silence, and Jurema could imagine Dr. Augustus running his hands through his grey hair, as he always did when he was undecided. Perhaps you're right, he said finally, his voice lower, but this weekend I want to go visit him. I can't stand this distance anymore. Of course, darling. We can go together on Sunday. I'll call Aunt Eleanor tomorrow to confirm. Jurema moved away silently. Isadora was skillfully manipulating her husband, keeping him sufficiently distant so he wouldn't discover the truth. But what would happen on Sunday? How would she explain Matthew's absence from the supposed country house? Determined to find out more, Jurema waited for everyone to retire. When the dining room clock struck midnight, she left her room at the back of the manor, wearing only a simple nightgown covered by an old robe. Barefoot to make no noise, she walked through the corridors she knew so well, moving like a shadow among the shadows. Approaching the east wing, she hid behind a column when she heard a noise. Holding her breath, she saw Isadora emerge from one of the rooms, still fully dressed despite the late hour. She carried a tray with what appeared to be an almost untouched plate of food and a glass of water. Her face, without the social mask she wore during the day, displayed a harsh and irritated expression. "Stubborn boy," Jurema heard her murmur as she locked the door with the golden key. "He's going to ruin everything." Isadora walked away down the corridor in the opposite direction from where Jurema was hiding. When her footsteps faded, Jurema approached the door that had just been locked. She pressed her ear against the cold wood and listened. At first, only silence. Then, very softly, the unmistakable sound of a child's restrained crying. A cry she knew all too well. "Matthew," she whispered, so low she could barely hear her own voice. "It's me, Jurema. I'm going to get you out of there. I promise." On the other side of the door, the crying abruptly ceased. For an instant, there was only silence. Then a small, frightened voice replied, "Jurema? Is that really you? Please help me. I'm scared." The confirmation that Matthew was indeed imprisoned in the east wing of the manor sent a chill down Jurema's spine. Her instinct had been right all along. Now she needed to act cautiously and intelligently. Any false move could worsen the boy's situation. "Hold on, my angel," Jurema whispered against the door. "I'll find a way to get you out of there." "She said I'd be here forever," Matthew's childish voice trembled. "She said no one would miss me because they think I'm traveling." "That's not true. Your father asks about you every day." A distant sound of footsteps made Jurema quickly move away from the door. She couldn't be seen there, not yet. She needed a plan. "I'll be back," she promised in an urgent whisper, before disappearing into the darkness of the corridor. Over the next 2 days, Jurema meticulously observed the house's routine. She discovered that Isadora visited the room where Matthew was imprisoned 3 times a day. In the morning, bringing a simple breakfast. In the mid-afternoon, apparently to check if everything was in order. And at night to collect the dinner tray. Dr. Augustus rarely approached that wing of the house. His work at the hospital kept him out for most of the day, and when he was home, Isadora ensured he remained occupied with social engagements or discussions about renovations and redecoration. On Friday morning, while tidying the couple's bedroom, Jurema found an opportunity she couldn't waste. Isadora was in the bathroom taking a long bath. Her beauty rituals usually lasted over an hour and had left her handbag on the dressing table. Listening carefully for the constant sound of the shower, Jurema silently approached and opened the expensive Italian leather bag. Among lipstick, cell phone, wallet, and various other items, she found what she was looking for, the golden key. With fingers trembling from tension, she picked up the key and quickly examined it. It was old, ornate, with a peculiar design at the end. It perfectly matched the locks on the east wing doors, which maintained the original style of the century-old manor. Jurema looked at the bathroom door. The sound of the shower continued, but she didn't know how much time she had left. With a quick decision, she took a piece of homemade soap from her apron pocket that she had prepared the night before specifically for this purpose. She pressed the key against the soft soap, creating a perfect impression of both sides. Then she returned the key exactly as she had found it and put the soap with the impression back in her pocket. She had barely finished making the bed when she heard the shower turn off. With her heart pounding but her hands steady, she continued her work as if nothing had happened. When Isadora emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a silk robe, Jurema was calmly folding a blanket at the foot of the bed. "Are you finished here?" Isadora asked, drying her hair with a towel. "Almost, madam. 5 more minutes and everything will be in order." "Excellent. Afterwards, please check if the dining room silverware is polished properly. We'll have important guests on Sunday." "Sunday?" Jurema feigned surprise. "But I thought you and the doctor were going to visit young Matthew this Sunday." A shadow crossed Isadora's face, so quick it would have been imperceptible to anyone less observant than Jurema. "There's been a change of plans," Isadora replied dryly. "Aunt Eleanor called saying Matthew has a mild virus. Nothing serious, but she thought it best to postpone the visit so as not to disturb him during his recovery. I understand. I hope he gets better soon." "Certainly." Isadora turned to the mirror, ending the conversation. That afternoon, taking advantage of her weekly 4-hour break, Jurema left the manor on foot, carrying a shopping bag and the carefully wrapped key mold. Her destination was Mr. Clarence's small workshop, an elderly locksmith who had kept his business in the same place for over 40 years in the old city centre. "Mrs. Jurema," exclaimed the white-haired man with calloused hands upon seeing her enter. "Long time no see. How's life at the rich folks' manor?" Jurema smiled at her old friend. Mr. Clarence was the widower of Mrs. Teresa, who had been the cook at Magnolia Manor before Josephine. The two had known each other for decades. "Still the same, Mr. Clarence. Lots of work and little time off?" She lowered her voice, looking around to make sure they were alone in the small shop. "I need a special favor today." Mr. Clarence adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses on his aquiline nose. "By your tone, I imagine it's not just changing the lock on your cabinet. I need you to make a copy of this key." Jurema unwrapped the soap mold. "It's urgent and delicate." The experienced locksmith's eyes examined the mold and then fixed on Jurema's tense face. "This is an impression of an old lock key, probably original from the imperial period, the kind used on those solid wood doors with iron ornaments." He paused. "And by your demeanor, I'm guessing the owner of the original key doesn't know about this mold." Jurema hesitated only an instant. "It's for a child's well-being. Mr. Clarence, I'm doing this for Matthew." The mention of the boy's name, whom the old man had known since he was a baby, was enough. Without asking further questions, Mr. Clarence nodded and took the mold to the back of the shop. "Come back in 2 hours," he simply said. Jurema used the time to do some necessary shopping, a small bottle of pain medicine, a few chocolate bars. Matthew loved chocolate, a small flashlight and batteries. She didn't know exactly how she would execute her plan, but she felt she needed to be prepared. When she returned to the locksmith shop, Mr. Clarence was waiting for her with a brown envelope. "Here it is. I tested it on a similar lock I have here, and it works perfectly." He hesitated before handing over the envelope. "Jurema, be careful. I don't know what's going on, but I've known you long enough to know you wouldn't do something like this without a good reason." "Thank you." "Mr. Clarence." She squeezed the old man's wrinkled hand with gratitude. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing." He shook his head. "Just promise me you'll tell me this story one day, when everything is resolved." Back at the manor, Jurema carefully placed the key in a secret compartment inside her mattress lining, a hiding place she had created years earlier to store her meager savings. Now she needed to devise a plan to free Matthew without alerting Isadora. The challenge was immense. Even if she managed to get the boy out of the room, where would she take him? If Dr. Augustus saw his own son at home when he believed he was in Surrey Hills, the initial shock might give Isadora time to invent some story. Furthermore, the word of a domestic employee against that of a renowned doctor's new wife would carry little weight unless she had concrete proof of Isadora's cruelty. That night during dinner, unexpected news emerged as an answer to her doubts. "I'll need to travel to Manchester tomorrow," Dr. Augustus announced as he savored the red wine. "There's a neurosurgery conference and I've been invited to present my technique in the main session." "Tomorrow? But you didn't mention anything about this before," said Isadora, visibly annoyed. "It was a last-minute invitation. The main speaker suffered an accident and won't be able to attend. It's an opportunity I can't refuse. The greatest specialists in Latin America will be there." "How long will you be away?" Isadora asked, quickly composing herself. "Just one night. I'll be back Sunday afternoon in time for dinner with the Montgomerys." Jerima, who was serving dessert, kept her face impassive, but her mind was racing. With Dr. Augustus away and the house full of guests on Sunday, there would be a window of opportunity. She would need to act on Saturday night, when most of the staff would be off and Isadora, accustomed to going out for her social engagements, would probably not be home. On Saturday morning, Dr. Augustus left early, leaving Isadora with a list of recommendations regarding the preparations for Sunday's dinner. Jerima observed how the woman seemed more relaxed after her husband's departure. Her smile became less controlled, her movements more natural, as if a mask had been partially removed. "I'm leaving at 7, Isadora announced to Sophia, the governess, as she had her breakfast. "I have dinner with the patrons of the Museum of Modern Art. Don't expect me before midnight." "Yes, madam," Sophia replied. "Do you wish for a driver to be on standby to pick you up later?" "It won't be necessary. Carmen Wellington offered me a ride. Just ensure the house is impeccable tomorrow." "The Montgomerys are extremely critical." "Certainly, madam." Jerima felt immense relief. She would have several hours with the house practically empty. Sophia, Silas, and Josephine, as usual on Saturdays, would leave after dinner to visit their families, returning only the next morning. Only the security guard at the gate and she would remain. And Joseph, the guard, usually stayed in his booth at the property entrance, far from the main house. While performing her daily tasks, Jerima couldn't help but notice how Isadora seemed especially attentive to her movements. Twice that morning, she turned to find the mistress's green eyes fixed on her, observing her with an unsettling intensity. "You seem distracted today." "Jerima," Isadora commented during lunch as the maid served the salad. "Any problem?" "No, madam. Just a little tired." Isadora took a sip of water without averting her gaze. "You know, I've noticed your interest in the east wing of the house." Jerima felt a chill but kept her expression neutral. "The east wing, madam?" "Yes, Joseph told me he saw you looking at the windows in that area several times this week." Damn Joseph and his keen eyes, Jerima thought. "Just checking for any leaks with these recent rains, madam. That part of the house is older and often has problems when it rains a lot." Isadora smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Your dedication is admirable, Jerima, but I insist you leave that area alone for now. As I said, we are renovating, and there are dangerous materials inside. I wouldn't want you to get hurt." "I understand, madam. Don't worry." The rest of the day passed with torturous slowness. Jerima felt the weight of Isadora's gaze wherever she went, as if the woman had developed a specific distrust towards her. When the clock finally struck 6:30 in the evening, and Isadora went upstairs to get ready for her engagement, Jerima allowed herself to breathe more freely. At 7:15, an elegant car stopped in front of the manor. Isadora, dazzling in a black dress with golden details, hurried out, leaving behind her characteristic perfume. Jerima watched from the kitchen window as the car drove away and disappeared through the main gate. It was time to act. "Sophia, I'll finish organizing the pantry and then retire." "I have a terrible headache," she told the governess, who was already preparing to leave. "Of course, Jerima, rest well. Tomorrow will be a busy day." One by one, the lights of the manor went out as the few present staff said goodbye and left. By 9 o'clock, Jerima was alone. Only the security guard remained at his distant post, in the entrance booth. With her heart pounding in her chest, Jerima went to her room. changed out of her uniform into dark, comfortable clothes, and took the golden key from its hiding place. She put the small flashlight, the pain medicine, the chocolate bars, and a small penknife she kept for emergencies into her pocket. She looked at herself in the mirror, seeing the reflection of a determined woman with eyes that conveyed the serene strength of someone who had faced many battles in life. "Let's go," she whispered to herself. Silently, she walked through the corridors of the manor, avoiding the floorboards she knew creaked, staying in the shadows out of habit, although she knew she was alone. Upon reaching the east wing door, she took a deep breath, inserted the key into the lock, and turned. The soft click of the lock yielding sounded like music to her ears. The door opened silently, revealing the dark corridor beyond. Jurema turned on the flashlight, partially covering the beam of light with her hand to reduce its reach, and advanced. She mentally counted the doors. The third on the right was where she believed Matthew was. She stopped before it, strained her ears, and heard soft breathing. Carefully, she inserted the key again. Another click and the door opened. The room was plunged in twilight, illuminated only by the faint moonlight that seeped through a crack in the heavy curtain. Jurema slowly moved the flashlight beam around the room until she found a small figure huddled on the bed. Matthew slept in a fetal position, as if trying to protect himself even in sleep. His clothes were rumpled, his hair disheveled, and even in the dim light it was clear that his face had lost its usual vibrancy. "Matthew," Jurema called in a low voice, approaching carefully so as not to startle him. "Matthew, my child, wake up." The boy stirred restlessly but did not wake immediately. Jurema gently touched his shoulder. "Matthew, it's me, Jurema. I've come to get you out of here." The boy's eyes suddenly opened wide with fear, and for an instant he seemed not to recognize her. Then understanding dawned in his gaze. "Jurema?" he whispered, as if fearing his voice might reach unwanted ears. "You really came?" "Of course, my angel. I promised, didn't I?" Jurema placed the flashlight on the bedside table, directing the light towards the ceiling to create diffused illumination. "How are you? Did she hurt you?" Matthew shook his head negatively, sitting up in bed. "No, she just keeps me locked up. She says it's for my own good, that I'm sick and need to be isolated." The boy swallowed hard. "But I know it's a lie. I heard her on the phone saying she needs to get rid of the problem. And the problem is me." Jurema felt a shiver run down her spine. What kind of woman would speak like that about an innocent child? "Are you hungry?" "I brought chocolate." Matthew's eyes lit up for the first time, and Jurema saw a flash of the joyful boy she knew. She handed him a chocolate bar, which he began to devour eagerly. "Matthew, we need to understand what's happening. Why is Isadora doing this to you? Was there an argument, something you saw or heard?" The boy chewed slowly, thoughtfully, as if organizing his thoughts. "It started after Mummy," so he hesitated, unable to pronounce the word. "After Mummy left. Daddy was very sad, he barely spoke to me. Then Isadora appeared. At first she was kind when Daddy was around, but when we were alone she looked at me differently." Jurema nodded, encouraging him to continue. "One night, I woke up thirsty and went downstairs for water. I heard voices in the study. It was Isadora talking to someone on the phone." Matthew hugged his knees, shrinking. "She said, 'Everything is as we planned. Caroline won't interfere anymore, and soon the boy will also be out of the way. All the fortune will be ours.'" The revelation hit Jurema like a physical blow. Caroline's death had not been natural as everyone thought. "Did you tell anyone about this, Matthew?" "I tried to talk to Daddy the next day, but Isadora was always around. When I finally managed to be alone with him, I told him what I had heard." The boy bit his lip. "Daddy didn't believe me. He said I was making up stories out of jealousy, that I needed to accept Isadora as part of the family." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "The next morning, Isadora said I needed rest and treatment, and locked me in here." Jurema hugged Matthew, feeling his small body tremble. Now everything made sense. Isadora had married Dr. Augustus out of interest in his fortune. Somehow she had been involved in Caroline's death, and now intended to get rid of the only legitimate heir. "Matthew, do you know if Isadora had any connection with your mother before?" "Did they know each other?" The boy frowned, thoughtful. "I never saw Mummy talking to her, but..." His eyes lit up with a memory. "Weeks before Mummy got sick, I found a photo in the study. It was a younger Isadora, next to a man who looked a lot like my Uncle Robert. Mummy's brother who lives in Europe. This information could be the key to the entire mystery. Uncle Robert, as far as Jurema knew, was Caroline's only living relative and, therefore, the only one who could contest the inheritance if something happened to Matthew. Matthew, we need to get out of here and find concrete evidence before confronting your father. Can you walk? The boy nodded, getting out of bed. He was visibly thinner and paler, but his eyes had regained some of their characteristic determination. Where are we going? First into your father's study. If Isadora is plotting something, there might be clues there. Silently, they left the room. Jurema firmly held Matthew's hand as they walked down the dark corridor of the east wing. As they reached the main door of that area, she carefully peeked into the main corridor, checking if there was no one. All clear. Let's go quickly. They crossed the manor like shadows, Jurema guiding Matthew through paths she knew like the back of her hand. The house was silent, but every creak of the old floorboards sounded like thunder in their alert ears. Upon reaching Dr. Augustus's study door, Jurema hesitated. It was locked, which was unusual. Does your father usually lock his study? No, Matthew shook his head. It started after Isadora moved in. Jurema assessed the lock. It was modern, different from the old locks in the house, and her key would not fit. They needed to find another entrance. The window, Matthew whispered. Outside there's a strong vine next to the study window. I used to use it to spy on Daddy when he was working. Jurema smiled for the first time that night. You were always too clever for your own good. They left through a backside door, feeling the cold London night air envelop their bodies. The garden was silent. Only the distant chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl disturbed the quiet. Circling the house carefully to avoid being seen from the guardhouse, they reached the study window on the first floor. The vine was thick and old, intertwined with the ornate window grille. Jurema examined it with concern. Matthew, let me go up first to check if it can hold our weight. No need, the boy replied. Look. He pointed to the window, which was slightly ajar. Just a crack, but enough to indicate it wasn't locked. Someone has been here recently, Jurema murmured. Unease grew in her chest, but there was no time to lose. With Matthew's help, she managed to climb the vine until she reached the window. She opened it carefully and peeked inside. The study was empty and dark. Jurema entered first, and then helped the boy do the same. Dr. Augustus's study was an austere and elegant environment, with dark wood-paneled walls, shelves filled with medical books, and a large portrait of Caroline above the fireplace. Jurema noticed that the portrait seemed to have been moved recently. There was a clear mark on the wall where it had previously hung higher. What exactly are we looking for? Matthew asked, keeping his voice low. Anything that connects Isadora to Uncle Robert or to your mother's death. Documents, letters, photos. They began to search carefully, trying to keep everything in the same position so as not to leave traces of their search. Jurema checked the desk drawers while Matthew looked among the books on the shelves. Jurema, I found something, the boy exclaimed after a few minutes, containing the excitement in his voice. Jurema quickly approached. Matthew had pulled out a thick medical book, Rare Neurological Diseases, and inside it he had found a yellowed envelope. Carefully, Jurema opened the envelope. It contained several old photographs and a handwritten letter. The first photo showed a much younger Isadora, embracing a man Jurema recognized as Robert, Caroline's brother. In the image, they seemed more than friends. There was intimacy in their embrace. Were they dating? Matthew asked, confused. Jurema picked up another photo. This one showed the same man next to Caroline, both smiling in front of a vineyard. Something was written on the back. Robert and I, Italy, 2010, last meeting before the fight. What fight? Jurema murmured, more to herself. The letter provided the answer. It was from Robert to Caroline, dated just 2 months before her death. Dearest sister, the first lines read, I finally got proof of what I told you about Isadora. She is not who she claims to be. Her real name is Isabella Reed, and she has been investigated for fraud in Manchester and Bristol. She has been involved in at least 2 cases of wealthy men who died under mysterious circumstances after marrying her. I couldn't find definitive proof of her guilt, but the coincidences are alarming. Please keep Augustus away from her. I'm returning to London next week to talk in person. Take care. With love, Robert. Jurema felt a shiver run down her spine. The letter confirmed her worst suspicions. "Mummy died before Uncle Robert arrived," Matthew said, his voice choked. "He only came for the funeral and then went back to Europe." "And now Isadora is married to your father," Jurema completed, the puzzle pieces fitting perfectly. "We need to find more evidence, something that will convince your father beyond a shadow of a doubt." They continued their search, now with renewed urgency. Matthew checked every book on the lower shelves, while Jurema examined the documents on the desk. It was then that she noticed something strange about Caroline's portrait. Approaching it, she realized that the frame seemed thicker on one side. Carefully, she removed the picture from the wall and turned it over. There was a secret compartment at the back of the frame. Inside it, she found a small glass vial and a USB drive. "Matthew, did your father always keep a USB drive in your mother's portrait?" The boy approached, intrigued. "Not that I know of. But Mummy used to say that if anything happened to her, the answer would be in her reflection." Jurema examined the vial. It had no label, just a number written by hand. The content seemed to be some kind of powdered medicine. "We need a computer to see what's on this USB drive." "There's a laptop in Daddy's room," Matthew suggested. They carefully put the letter and photos back in the envelope, placing it back in the book and returning it to the shelf. Jurema wrapped the vial and USB drive in her handkerchief and put them in her pocket. They were about to leave the study when they heard a sound that made their hearts freeze. The unmistakable noise of a car arriving. They ran to the window. A taxi had stopped at the main entrance, and from it, an elegant figure dressed in black was stepping out. "It's her," Matthew whispered, panic evident in his voice. Isadora came back early. Jurema thought quickly. They couldn't return to the East Wing. They would have to pass through the entrance hall where Isadora would be. And staying in the study would be too risky. It was probably the first place she would check if she discovered Matthew had escaped. "Let's go to my room," Jurema decided. "It's in the back, away from the main quarters. We can get there through the service corridors." They left the study in silence, carefully closing the window. They climbed down the vine and, staying in the shadows of the garden, circled the house to the service entrance. Jurema's heart was pounding so hard that she feared the sound might betray them. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she guided Matthew through the narrow corridors used by the staff, deliberately avoiding the paths Isadora might take. When they finally reached Jurema's small room in the staff area, they closed the door with momentary relief. But they knew they were far from safe. "What do we do now?" Matthew asked, sitting on the simple bed, fear and exhaustion finally visible on his childish face. Jurema looked at the boy she had known since birth, the son Caroline had asked her to care for on her deathbed. She touched the pocket where she kept the mysterious vial and the USB drive, the possible evidence of Isadora's crime. A plan began to form in her mind. "Now we're going to find out exactly what your stepmother is plotting, and then we're going to stop her once and for all." Jurema's modest room, with its single bed, a simple wardrobe and a small chest of drawers, became the makeshift headquarters for the plan they needed to devise. Matthew, despite his evident tiredness, remained alert, his eyes fixed on the screen of the small tablet Jurema kept for her video calls with her daughter, who lived in Brighton. "I can't open it," the boy whispered, trying to access the contents of the USB drive they had found in the study. "It asks for a password." Jurema bit her lip, thoughtful. "Did your mother use any specific password?" "Birthdays, important dates." Matthew frowned, concentrating. "She always used the date of her wedding to Daddy for almost everything. 2005 Try it." The boy typed the numbers, but the screen remained locked. They tried other combinations, Matthew's birthday, Caroline's, even Dr. Augustus's graduation date. Nothing worked. "Wait," Matthew suddenly said. "Mummy had a phrase she always repeated to me before bed. She said it was her family's motto for generations." "What was it?" "The truth lives in the light." In Latin it was, "Veritas in luce vivit." Jurema smiled. "Try the initials. Vil V." Matthew typed the letters, and to their surprise the lock screen disappeared, revealing the contents of the USB drive. There were only 2 files, a PDF document titled Will and a folder named Evidence. They started with the will. It was Caroline's official document, signed 6 months before her death. In it, she clearly specified that all her personal fortune, derived from the inheritance of the traditional coffee-growing family she came from, should go to Matthew, with Dr. Augustus as administrator until the boy turned 21. There was, however, a specific clause. If anything happened to Matthew before he reached adulthood, the fortune would be divided between Dr. Augustus and Robert, Caroline's brother. "That's why she wants to get rid of me," Matthew murmured, comprehension dawning in his young eyes. "With the half that would go to Uncle Robert, she must have some plan. And your uncle has been incommunicado in Europe since your mother's funeral, hasn't he?" Jurema connected another piece of the puzzle. "We need to check if he's really there, or if—" She left the sentence incomplete, not wanting to put into words the terrible thought that crossed her mind. Instead, she opened the evidence folder. The contents made them both gasp in surprise. There was a series of emails between Isadora, or Isabella, her real name, and a man identified only as M. The emails dated from 3 months before Caroline's death and detailed a meticulous plan. The poison is undetectable, causes symptoms similar to a stroke, and leaves no trace in a conventional autopsy. Administered gradually over weeks, it will appear to be a natural death. Robert will be next, but we need to wait for the inheritance to be transferred. The accident must look convincing, perhaps during his next yacht trip. The boy is the only real obstacle. Once he's out of the way, we'll control the entire Arlington and Montgomery fortunes. Augustus is easily manipulated in his emotional state. The emails continued, revealing a cold and calculated plan to systematically eliminate the family and take control of one of London's largest fortunes. "Mummy found out," Matthew whispered, silent tears streaming down his face. "She discovered the plan and kept the evidence." "And Isadora must have suspected," Jurema completed. "That's why the rush to marry your father and isolate you. She feared Caroline had left something behind." They looked at the mysterious vial they had found along with the USB drive. Jurema examined it carefully without opening it. "I think this is the poison mentioned in the emails. Your mother must have gotten a sample as proof." A noise in the corridor made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching, the characteristic sound of high heels tapping against the wooden floor. Jurema quickly disconnected the USB drive and hid it, along with the vial, inside a small sewing box. She placed Matthew under the bed and covered the entrance with the blanket that reached the floor. "Don't make a sound," she whispered. The door opened without warning, and Isadora appeared in the doorway. Her green eyes scanned the small room with suspicion. "Still awake, Jurema?" "It's past midnight." Jurema, who had sat on the edge of the bed with a prayer book in her hands, forced a serene smile. "I have trouble sleeping sometimes, madam." "Age brings insomnia." Isadora entered the room without asking permission, her eyes analyzing every corner. Jurema felt her heart race as she approached the bed. "I came to check if everything is ready for tomorrow. Dinner needs to be impeccable." "Certainly, madam. Josephine has already prepared almost everything. Only the final touches are needed in the morning." Isadora walked slowly through the small space, stopping in front of the chest of drawers where the sewing box was. She reached out to touch it. "What a pretty box. It looks old." "It was my grandmother's," Jurema replied, keeping her voice firm despite her fear. "I keep my little mementos in it." Isadora smiled, a cold smile that did not reach her eyes. "You know, Jurema, I went to check on our little guest in the East Wing. Curious how the door was unlocked." Jurema felt her blood run cold but showed no reaction. "The East Wing door? I thought you kept it locked during the renovation." "Don't play dumb." Isadora's voice lost all pretense of cordiality. "I know you took him out of there. Where is the boy?" Jurema slowly stood up, placing herself between Isadora and the bed where Matthew was hiding. "I don't know what you're talking about." Isadora's face contorted into a mask of fury. She grabbed Jurema's arm with surprising force. "Listen closely, little maid. I've worked too hard to get here. I won't allow a meddling cleaner to ruin my plans. Tell me where the boy is, or I swear you'll regret it." Jurema held her gaze firm, showing no fear despite the pain in her arm. "You should be ashamed. Poisoning an innocent woman, planning to do the same to a boy. What kind of monster are you?" Isadora's eyes widened for an instant before narrowing again. "So you know. That just makes everything simpler." She released Jurema's arm and stepped back. "Do you really think anyone will believe you, a domestic employee against the wife of a respected doctor? Be reasonable, Jurema." I can make your life very comfortable if you cooperate. Never, Jurema replied, her voice low but firm. Isadora shrugged with false nonchalance. As you wish. I'll find the boy anyway. And as for you, she smiled cruelly, accidents happen every day, don't they? Especially with elderly people living alone. The threat hung in the air like poison. Isadora turned and left the room, closing the door with unnecessary force. As soon as her footsteps faded, Matthew crawled out from under the bed, his face pale with fear. She's going to find me, Jurema. And she's going to hurt you too. Jurema hugged the boy, her brain working rapidly. No, she won't. Tomorrow is the big dinner. All your father's important friends will be here, including Justice Miles and Detective Inspector Paul from the Special Precinct. It's our chance to expose Isadora publicly, with witnesses who cannot be ignored. But how? She'll be alert now. Jurema took the USB drive and the vial from the sewing box. We'll need a careful plan, and the help of people we can trust. The next morning, Magnolia Manor was bustling with activity. Extra staff had been hired for the dinner service, the catering company set up its operation in the expanded kitchen, and florists worked on the elaborate arrangements that would decorate the main table. Amidst all this movement, it was easy to go unnoticed. Jurema had hidden Matthew in the small storage room adjacent to the laundry, a rarely visited place where cleaning supplies and seasonal decorations were kept. With an improvised mattress, food, water, and the tablet for distraction, the boy would be safe until dinner time. Taking advantage of the confusion of the preparations, Jurema managed to send a message to Sophia, Josephine, and Silas, asking them to meet discreetly during the lunch break. The three were the oldest employees in the house, had loved Caroline and adored Matthew. If there was anyone Jurema could trust, it was them. The meeting took place in the small laundry room, away from the watchful eyes of Isadora, who spent most of her time supervising the preparations in the dining room and main hall. Good heavens, the boy was trapped here all this time? Exclaimed Josephine, after Jurema revealed the whole story and showed the evidence they had found. And the witch poisoned Mrs. Caroline, Silas added, his wrinkled face contorted with indignation. I always suspected that woman. No one wins over a widower so quickly without ulterior motives. Sophia, always the most pragmatic, went straight to the point. What can we do to help? Jurema explained her plan. It was risky, but with everyone's participation, it had a chance to work. We need Dr. Augustus to see the evidence with his own eyes, in front of witnesses whom Isadora cannot bribe or threaten, Jurema concluded, and we have to ensure Matthew is protected until then. Each received a specific task. Sophia, as the governess, would have access to the sound system used for ambient music during dinner. She would connect the USB drive at the right moment. Silas would be responsible for ensuring a safe escape route for Matthew, should everything go wrong. Josephine would take care of distracting Isadora at crucial moments. And Jurema would be responsible for the final confrontation. As the others discreetly returned to their duties, Jurema made a final visit to Matthew in his hiding place. The boy was tense but determined. It's going to work, isn't it, Jurema? He asked, his small voice contrasting with the courage in his eyes. It will, my angel. By this time tomorrow you'll be safe again, and your father will know the whole truth. She kissed his forehead and left, carefully closing the camouflaged storage room door. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activities. Jurema performed her tasks automatically, while her mind reviewed every detail of the plan. She observed Isadora from afar, noticing how the woman seemed increasingly tense as the hours passed, undoubtedly worried about Matthew's disappearance and what Jurema might do with the information she possessed. At 7 in the evening, the first guests began to arrive. Magnolia Manor shone as in old times, crystal chandeliers reflecting light in 1,000 directions, floral arrangements strategically placed, the family's antique silverware polished to gleam like mirrors. London's elite paraded through the halls in evening wear, champagne glasses in hand, elegant conversations floating in the perfumed air. Dr. Augustus, freshly arrived from Manchester, circulated among the guests with his usual discreet charm, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing around him. Isadora remained by his side like a brilliant shadow, her blood-red dress contrasting dramatically with the pearls around her neck, her impeccable smile hiding the cruelty Jurema now knew so well. Is everything ready? Sophia whispered as she passed Jurema with a tray of empty glasses. Jurema nodded almost imperceptibly. At dessert time, Josephine will give the signal. Dinner proceeded with the expected pomp. The 6 courses prepared by the hired chef were served in perfect sequence, accompanied by appropriate wines. Conversations about politics, art, and the latest social scandals flowed around the imposing table. No one noticed the tension in Jurema's shoulders as she discreetly served, nor the vigilant gaze Isadora occasionally cast her way. When the dessert plates, an elaborate construction of chocolate and red berries, were placed before each guest, Josephine accidentally dropped a tray of cutlery near Isadora, creating a small commotion. It was the signal. Sophia, positioned near the sound system, discreetly inserted the USB drive. Seconds later, the ambient music ceased, replaced by the clear voice of Caroline Arlington, recorded weeks before her death. My name is Caroline Montgomery Arlington. If you are hearing this recording, I am probably no longer among you. I have reason to believe my life is in danger. The woman who presents herself as Isadora Montgomery is, in fact, Isabella Reed, a swindler known for approaching wealthy families and causing convenient accidents, the voice continued, detailing the discoveries Caroline had made, including about the poison that was being slowly administered to her. The hall, previously animated with conversations, plunged into a sepulchral silence. All eyes turned to Isadora, who had visibly paled. Dr. Augustus stood up, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. What kind of sick joke is this? It was at that moment that Jurema stepped forward, taking the vial they had found behind the portrait from her pocket. It's no joke, Dr. Augustus. This is the poison mentioned in the recording. Your wife hid it in the false bottom of her face creams. A murmur ran through the hall. Isadora, recovering from the initial shock, forced a laugh. What nonsense. This maid has clearly gone mad. Augustus, darling, you're not going to let a servant disrupt our dinner with these ridiculous accusations, are you? Dr. Augustus seemed torn, his gaze alternating between the vial in Jurema's hands and his new wife's face. It was then that the last piece of the plan came into action. Silas opened the hall doors and Matthew entered, pale but determined, still wearing the rumpled clothes from his captivity. Daddy, he called, his small voice echoing in the silent hall. I was trapped here the whole time. In the East Wing. She locked me in there and said she was going to get rid of me like she did with Mummy. Time seemed to freeze in the hall of Magnolia Manor. All breaths were held, all eyes fixed on Matthew's small figure, who remained at the entrance with his shoulders squared in a courage that defied his age. The silence was so dense that one could hear the clinking of pearls on Isadora's necklace as she abruptly stood up. Augustus, this is ridiculous, she exclaimed, her sharp voice betraying her nervousness. The boy is clearly disturbed, and this maid, this woman manipulated the situation to harm us. Dr. Augustus Arlington remained motionless, his face a mask of disbelief and confusion. His eyes moved between the son he hadn't seen in weeks and the elegant wife beside him. Caroline's recording still echoed in his mind, each word piercing the bubble of denial he had built around himself. Matthew? The doctor's voice came out weak, almost a whisper. What's going on, son? Weren't you in Surrey Hills? Before the boy could answer, Isadora intervened, grasping her husband's arm with surprising force. Of course he was. This is some cruel trick orchestrated by your maid. She probably brought the boy back without telling us to create this circus. But Matthew was not intimidated. With firm steps he approached the dinner table, his eyes fixed on his father. I never left this house, Daddy, he declared with the clarity and sincerity that only a child could possess. She locked me in the East Wing room after I tried to tell you what I had heard. She said I was sick and needed to be isolated, but it was a lie. I was trapped. Detective Inspector Paul, who was among the guests, rose from his seat at the table, his posture immediately shifting from social to professional. That is a very serious accusation. Young Matthew, he said, approaching the boy gently. Are you sure of what you are saying? Absolutely, Matthew replied. Jurema can confirm. She found me last night and freed me. All eyes turned to Jurema, who stood firm, still holding the vial of poison. Her posture was no longer that of a submissive maid, but that of a woman determined to reveal the truth, no matter the cost. I found the boy locked in a room in the East Wing, she confirmed, thin, pale, frightened. Isadora kept him imprisoned while lying to everyone, saying he was at an aunt's country house. What aunt? Justice Miles asked, frowning. Caroline was an orphan, and her only brother lives in Europe. Exactly, Jurema continued. It was all a setup. Just as Mrs. Caroline's death was not natural. Isadora let out a loud laugh, too forced to sound genuine. Now you're accusing me of killing Caroline? This is defamation. Augustus, aren't you going to do anything? But Dr. Augustus seemed to finally awaken from his trance. He stared at Isadora with eyes that were beginning to register doubt. You told me Matthew was with your Aunt Eleanor in Surrey Hills. You said you spoke to him on the phone every day. And I did, Isadora insisted, though her voice no longer carried the same conviction. He must have gotten better and escaped later. Liar, exclaimed Josephine, who had been observing in silence until then. I was on the extension when you pretended to speak to the boy on the phone. It was a recording. I noticed by how his voice sounded artificial, repetitive. The net was closing around Isadora. Her green eyes scanned the hall, quickly assessing her options. The guests, once friends and social allies, now stared at her with suspicion and horror. The detective inspector was already on the phone, requesting a team to the scene. Silas had discreetly positioned himself near the main door, blocking a possible escape. With a swift movement, Isadora snatched the vial with the supposed poison from Jurema's hand. This proves nothing, she shouted, shaking the small container. It could be anything. Sugar, salt, talcum powder. We can find out with a laboratory analysis, Detective Inspector Paul calmly replied, approaching with an outstretched hand. Please, madam, hand over the vial. But Isadora recoiled. Her eyes now wild, scanning the hall like a cornered beast. You don't understand, she hissed, her voice taking on a tone no one had heard before, raw, stripped of any refinement. He deserved something better than that insipid woman. I gave Augustus what Caroline could never give. Passion, ambition, a life beyond these mouldy walls. Her confession, born of despair and rage, echoed in the silent hall. The guests exchanged horrified glances. Dr. Augustus clutched Matthew even tighter, as if to protect him not only physically, but also from the poisonous words that now filled the air. Isabella Reed, Detective Inspector Paul announced formally. You are under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping, attempted murder, and possibly murder. You have the right to remain silent. But Isadora or Isabella didn't hear the rest. With a furious scream, she hurled the vial to the floor, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces, scattering the white powder across the polished marble. Then she forcefully pushed the dining table, knocking over dishes, crystal and floral arrangements in a spectacular mess that momentarily distracted everyone in the hall. Taking advantage of the chaos, she ran towards the side door, which led to the back gardens. Silas tried to intercept her, but she was quick and slippery as a snake. In seconds, she had disappeared into the darkness of the night. Don't let her escape, Detective Inspector Paul shouted, as two guests who were security officers ran after her. Confusion took over Magnolia Manor. Stunned guests discussed in small groups, some already grabbing their cell phones to be the first to spread the scandal, others offering help with the search. Detective Inspector Paul organized a police perimeter around the property by phone, while some staff members tried to clean up the mess caused by the overturned table. Amidst the chaos, Dr. Augustus remained seated in a secluded armchair, hugging his son as if he feared he might disappear again. His face, normally composed, showed the weight of all the revelations of that night. The betrayal, the danger his son had faced, the terrible possibility that Caroline's death had not been natural. Jurema approached silently, offering Matthew a glass of water. Thank you. Jurema, the boy murmured, drinking eagerly. Is it really over? Before Jurema could answer, they heard a commotion coming from the property entrance. Minutes later, Detective Inspector Paul returned to the hall with a grave expression. They apprehended her, he announced. She was trying to scale the side wall but fell and twisted her ankle. She's being taken to the precinct right now. A collective sigh swept through the room. For many present, it was like waking from a nightmare. Or perhaps, as Justice Miles later commented, like watching the climax of the most impressive theatrical spectacle of their lives. We will need formal depositions, the detective inspector continued, addressing Jurema, Sophia, Josephine, and Silas, and of course from young Matthew when he has recovered from the trauma. Dr. Augustus stood up, keeping his arm protectively around his son's shoulders. "He'll need time," he said, his voice choked. "We all will." Turning to Jurema, the doctor looked at her as if truly seeing her for the first time, not as the silent maid who moved through the house's corridors, but as the courageous woman who had saved his son, and possibly his own life. "Jurema," his voice faltered for an instant, "I don't know how to thank you. What you did, you risked everything." "I did what any decent person would do, Doctor," she replied simply. "Mrs. Caroline entrusted this boy to my care the day he was born. I promised her I would always protect him." The following hours passed in a blur of activity. The police arrived in force, cordoning off areas of the house for investigation, collecting preliminary statements, photographing the room where Matthew had been held. Guests were dismissed after giving brief statements, taking with them the story that would undoubtedly be the talk of all London social circles for months. When the house finally quieted down, with only a few police officers still working on collecting evidence, Dr. Augustus found Jurema in the kitchen, where she was preparing soup for Matthew. "He's sleeping," the doctor said, accepting the cup of tea Josephine offered him. "Finally sleeping in his own bed." "That's good," Jurema replied, stirring the broth slowly. "The boy has been through a lot." "We all have." Dr. Augustus took a sip of tea, his gaze lost somewhere distant. "You know, I truly believed her. Every word, every kindness, every promise." He laughed humorlessly. "A neurosurgeon who can't see what's right in front of his eyes." "Grief blinds us, Doctor," Josephine said softly, "and Mrs. Caroline is greatly missed in this house." "She is," he agreed, running a hand over his tired face. "More than I allowed myself to admit. Perhaps that's why it was so easy for that woman to manipulate me. I wanted to believe that happiness could be found again. And it will be," Jurema affirmed with conviction, "in a different way at a different time. You have Matthew, and he has you." Dr. Augustus nodded, unshed tears shining in his eyes. "Jurema, I want you to know that your place in this house is guaranteed forever, if you wish. Not just as an employee, but as part of the family. Without you," he swallowed hard, "without you I would have lost everything without even knowing." The next morning, Magnolia Manor seemed to have awakened from a long nightmare. Sunlight streamed through the open windows, illuminating corners that had remained in shadow for too long. Matthew had breakfast on the veranda with his father, both conversing with an openness and sincerity they hadn't shared in a long time. The morning newspapers already featured sensational headlines about the case. Socialite accused of poisoning wife of famous doctor and kidnapping stepson. Drama at Magnolia Manor. Maid uncovers crime of passion. Millionaire fortune behind attempted family extermination. The following days brought new developments. Analysis of the powder from the broken vial confirmed it to be a rare neurotoxic substance that produced symptoms similar to a stroke. Exhumation of Caroline's body was requested to confirm the presence of the same substance. The emails found on the USB drive were authenticated and revealed more details of the macabre plan, including the identity of accomplice M, Michael Thorne, a document forger who had helped Isabella create her identity as Isadora Montgomery. Both had carried out similar scams before, though never so ambitious or potentially lethal. Robert, Caroline's brother who lived in Europe, was located and informed about everything that had happened. He immediately flew to London, bringing with him more documents and evidence he had collected about Isabella Isadora. His arrival at Magnolia Manor was a moment of profound emotion. The reunion with his nephew, who so resembled his lost sister, the tears shared with Dr. Augustus, who now understood why Caroline had tried to warn him about Isadora in the weeks before her passing. Throughout these transformations, Jurema remained the constant and comforting presence she had always been, helping the house and its inhabitants resume a routine that, if not exactly the same as before, carried the promise of healing and renewal. On a quiet afternoon, weeks after that fateful night, Jurema found Matthew sitting under one of the magnolias that gave the manor its name. The boy was drawing intently, the vivid colors of the crayon contrasting with the intense green of the lawn where he was settled. "What are you drawing, my angel?" she asked, sitting beside him. Matthew showed her the drawing. Magnolia Manor depicted with the simplicity and sincerity of a child's hand, but with open, colourful windows and several smiling figures in the garden himself. His father, Jurema, Josephine, Sophia, Silas, and even a dog. "Daddy said we can adopt a dog," he explained, pointing to the canine figure with disproportionately long legs. "A stray from the shelter, one of those no one wants." "That's a great idea," Jurema smiled, noticing how Matthew's eyes had regained their trademark sparkle. "Every boy should have a dog." "And look," he continued, turning the page to show another drawing, "here we are visiting Mummy." The new drawing showed a colourful cemetery, in a way only a child could imagine, a place of eternal rest, full of flowers, butterflies, and an intense blue sky. Among the gravestones decorated with hearts, a reunited family paid tribute to a loved one. "We're going there on Sunday," Matthew said. "Daddy said we can take the white orchids she loved, and we can tell her that everything is okay now." Jurema felt a lump in her throat. "She already knows, my angel." "I'm sure she knows." At that moment, Dr. Augustus approached, carrying a tray with fresh lemonade. There was something different about him, an invisible weight that seemed to have been lifted from his shoulders, allowing him to walk more upright, to smile more easily. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, placing the tray on the garden table. "No, Daddy. I was just showing Jurema my drawings." The doctor sat in the chair beside them, observing his son with eyes that now truly saw, not through the veil of grief and denial that had separated father and son for so long. "Jurema," he began, pouring a glass of lemonade for her, "Robert and I talked. When all this is legally resolved, we would like to establish a foundation in Caroline's name, to help vulnerable children and women at risk. That's a wonderful idea, Doctor, and we would like you to be part of the board of directors. No one better than you to understand the value of courage in the face of adversity." Jurema accepted the glass, too surprised to respond immediately. After a life serving behind the scenes, the idea of occupying a prominent place, of being able to make a difference in the lives of other people, was both daunting and deeply satisfying. It would be an honor. "Doctor," Matthew jumped up, his childish energy restored, and hugged Jurema tightly. "See, Jurema, now you're going to be important, just like you always should have been." Jurema smiled, stroking the boy's hair. "You know, Matthew, sometimes the most important people are those no one notices, who work in the shadows, who observe when everyone else just glances by. Your mother knew that." Dr. Augustus nodded, a new understanding in his eyes. "It's true. Caroline always said that true nobility isn't in who we are or what we possess, but in what we choose to do when no one is looking." The three remained silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts, as the gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the century-old magnolias. Above them, clouds paraded slowly across the blue London sky, and somewhere nearby a little bird sang, celebrating the perfect simplicity of that moment. At Magnolia Manor, where luxury and appearances had for so long hidden dark secrets, the truth had finally found its place, and with it, a new form of justice, one that came not from courts or laws but from the hearts of those who have the courage to do what is right, even when the whole world seems to conspire against them.